Hello, and welcome to this special episode of In Pursuit of Truth and Happiness. Last episode, I began my introduction to the Odyssey by exploring the basic storyline and setup of the book itself. But before I continued my exploration of the Odyssey, I thought it would be prudent to better explain my interpretive method. I will do this by exploring two different methods of interpretation that both claim to preserve objective truth, of which I will cover in two episodes. I found the best way to explore these two interpretive methods was to explore two writing samples from the two giants that represent best the two different methods of interpretation of objective truth: St. Thomas Aquinas and William of Ockham. My choosing these two historical figures stands as such because in our own time I find that two interpretive methods, the ones I'm exploring in these next two episodes, were simply explained best by both these men. Thus, many subscribe to one of these two methods of interpretation, whether they know it or not, and can actually trace their school of interpretive thought to one of these two men. Our society and how it treats objective truth, in other words, can largely be ascribed to what these two men wrote and how their writings influence others who shape the world, such as, for example, Martin Luther, whose writings I will cover in the distant future. I will begin by exploring St. Thomas Aquinas and his understanding of how to properly understand objective truth. After this, I will then cover William of Ockham and how he claims we should properly approach objective truth. Based on St. Thomas Aquinas' article over truth from Summa Theologica, Part 1, Question 16, Article 1, we see that for Aquinas, truth itself is a reality that exists outside the self. And this truth that exists outside the self shapes and informs all reality through its own divine intelligence, which lays down the framework for all things that we come to know, including ourselves. To be more specific in how this is worded and how truth, in its derivatives from truth itself, exists in us, Aquinas states that truth resides in the intellect. We learn of the universal forms or essences of things, and these universals exist as truths in our intellect that measures all external things bearing these universals, such, for example, the principal form of redness in our intellect, which measures all shades of the color red. Universals, such as red or stones or people, are preconceived in God's intellect. God, who himself is truth in this case, and not someone who is just truthful, that is, through which all things are made. Thus, the goodness of a thing lays in how well the thing in question materially conforms to the essence or universal form conceived in God's intellect. Aquinas has essentially borrowed Aristotle's language and philosophy to explain the principle of sacramentality, which tells us that not only do universals exist, such as a universal red that measures all other colors of red, but mankind's material self-conforming with its inner dimension, its soul, as God intended in his intellect, is what will bring fulfillment and happiness to mankind. But this theological framework embraces the first principle that God is guided by his own intellect, as the architect is guided by his vision. In this theology of God, God does not determine what is good, but reveals what is good. In this theology, God could never, even in theory, have made, for example, adultery good, because it never has been nor will be. This understanding of God retains a reciprocal relationship with Aquinas' theology on the oneness and Trinitarian mystery of God, which preserves the absolute freedom of God, because for Aquinas, and this being in line with the Johannine literature of the New Testament, God is truth and not just truthful. God is not enslaved to himself in this, but possesses himself in freedom. Universals, such as the example of redness measuring all shades of red, are thus the bridge to God and vice versa. God reveals himself in the sacramentality of creation, of which the universals are the foundation and measurement of. In this framework, decidedly theological in character, we glimpse the application of objective truth that I myself use for this podcast. That is, that truth is an objective standard that exists outside the human intelligence, that the human intelligence does not create, and nor does divinity necessarily determine to be, even if in theory, but is simply revealed to humanity and acts as the universal standard applied to all things that share the universal essence in question, just as, again, all shades of red share in the universal essence of the universal color red, while only tending to this universal red in varying degrees. I will revisit the relevancy of Aquinas' understanding and application of objective truth to my interpretation of the Odyssey at the end of this episode. But to summate here, we see St. Thomas Aquinas applies the principle through his explanation of what truth is. The opposing view to Aquinas' understanding and application of objective truth is a framework where God is not guided by his intellect, but by his will. The difference between being guided by the will versus the intellect might seem like splitting theological hairs, but a whirlwind of implication lay on the horizon. If truth is dictated by will versus intellect, the entire nature of truth is upended, as is the entire essence of the world, including, but not limited to, the existence of universals and the nature of objective truth itself. We find this framework given to us by William of Ockham, who I will cover in my next episode, after which I will use the objective standard of truth as outlined here by Aquinas to continue my analysis of the Odyssey. Thank you for listening to this episode of In Pursuit of Truth and Happiness.